Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in May. May flew by. I read 6 books in May. Not very many. I don't really know what happened. A couple of them I think were longer. Even split. It's a 50-50 split. We have 3 non-fictions and 3 fiction books. Without further ado, the first book I read this month. Well, the first book I finished this month, I should say. I started this one I think in April. But that's A Short History of Queer Women by Kirsty Lower. This is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a short history of queer women. We're mostly looking at like specific queer women. We begin with Sappho. So we go back to the beginning of lesbianism. We do get quite a good variety in terms of intersectionality. We go to a bunch of different countries, a bunch of different kind of marginalised communities. I do think where it's such a whirlwind tour, I do think some generalisations were made. I don't think you could take every word completely as Bible in this. I think there might be some parts of history that she's kind of generalising and covering quickly. There are so many women in this that I recognised and knew of but didn't know were queer, and it was just really accessible. It was really funny. Kirsty has a really fun sense of humour. Her personality is really woven into this one. I listened to the audiobook. It's narrated by an American woman, and Kirsty is English, and there's a lot of Englishisms within the writing, and so it always kind of threw me. The narrator did a fine job, but the humour kind of really pulled it through. I think actually I would have preferred to read it with my eyes now that I remember it was an American narrator, but it was a really quick, easy listen was the point I was originally going to make. Apart from the fact that, you might want to do some more research into these things because they are so briefly explained. Just the way she frames it, assumptions are drawn. She's paraphrasing conversations and stuff, or conversations how she would imagine them to be. Very much not necessarily how they actually were. It's a great stepping stone into more research though, and it is, I did learn a lot. I'm glad I read it. I gave it 5 stars. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. It does what it says it's going to do, and it does it fairly well. So I really liked it. I would definitely recommend it if it sounds appealing to you. And then next up is another non-fiction, that is Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. Surprising new science that will transform your sex life, revised and updated. So I'm on something of a mission to read 10 non-fiction books this year to kind of better myself, and this was on that list. Ever since it was mentioned in sex education, I've been wanting to read it. And I do just think this is a book that everyone should read. Why don't we know this stuff? So much of it, I underlined so much of this. And there's even the stuff that's not necessarily relevant to you. It's still just good information to know that this is the way that humans work. This is the way that human sexuality works. I just feel like this is information we all need to know. And she really contradicts so many of the myths and the miseducations that have been pressed on us, societally, even within classrooms. There are so many things that are just assumed, and so many ways in which people can feel bad because they're not like this or they're not like that. And she just completely fresh slate, this is actually how it is. No two people are alike. A couple key, the back says about turning on the ons and turning off the offs, taking control of the context, and responsive desire. These are 3 big things that have a lot of misconceptions around them, and probably will fundamentally change the way you think about sex if you know how they actually work. I don't know. Even if you read it and it's not you kind of knew most of it, or you don't think it's gonna change, I still just think it's good to know. So I'd highly recommend this. I also listened to this one via audiobook, and it was narrated by the author, and she did a phenomenal job. And there was a guy as well whose name I did not prepare because again I just thought it was narrated by the author. There'd be these quotes every now and then from men basically, or written in a steamy book, and he would narrate them, or a classic book, and the way he did it differently depending on the voice. And there's one part where he was talking from Grey, what's his name from 50 Shades of Grey, Christian Grey's perspective. It was great. I loved that. I found it a blast. I would give this one a solid, see, I feel for what it does, it's a 10 out of 10. I'll say 9 out of 10 just because I don't know if I'm obsessed with it, but it might be a 10 out of 10. And it's also, look at how floppy that is. And then next up is the first fiction book I finished, and that was Saltblood by Francesca de Torres. I pre-ordered this one and completely forgot about it because look at those stunning pages. This is about pirates. That was the big draw for me. And actually, the characters in this book were mentioned in A Short History of Queer Women. So when it came up, I was like, hang on a minute, I feel like I have a book about them. And I did. It was this one. So we follow from Mary. Mary, as a kid, had to pretend to be a boy. Mary, before she was born, she had an older brother, Mark, but Mark died before Mary was born. Mark's father died while away at war. So Mark's mother would send Mary and Mark's mother money to look after Mark. But Mark died, and then Mary came along from another man, and so her mother dressed Mary up as Mark so she could keep getting the inheritance from the grandmother. I feel like that is needlessly overcomplicated. And so Mary grew up her very early life as a boy, and she kind of stuck with it. Her mother ended up sending her away to a house to work as like a footman type position, and then she ended up joining the navy again as Mark, and that's where she really began this love of the sea, and eventually she does become a pirate. And queerness in here as well, hence why it's mentioned in The Short History of Queer Women. It's very much set on real. It's set on real life. I don't know if I've said that. Like, Mary Mark was a real person. It's a very slow burn. We're very much following her life rather than pirate adventures per se. Like, it's very much just about her and her experience. It was beautifully written. It was incredibly crisp and transportive, the writing. It was one of those stories that just felt really tender. Every now and then I read one of those and I'm just like, oh, I need to cherish it and hold it so carefully. It's so beautiful. I absolutely loved spending time with our main character. I came to really care for her. I will say it's one of those, though, where the writing / narration, I just felt a distance between me and her, and I don't really know what it is. This is not an uncommon thing that happens for me, and I can never put my finger on what it is. Maybe because we're flying through time so quickly, but it feels like it's really rooted in the writing. Maybe because it's written as if Mary's recounting her story. That might have something to do with it. It's not like we lose a sense of agency and immediacy. Like, we're not there with her in those moments as much, because it's all very clear that it's all long gone, said and done. Oh, I do actually, yeah, in my notes, we also sweep over such a big time period. We're only getting the highlights. We don't get to see a ton of day-to-day life or anything like that. It does at point feels like we're just pointing from important plot point to important plot point to important, but not important life event. But at the same time, where we're following her whole life, by the time you get to the end, you think back to the beginning and you're like, Jesus Christ, I've just witnessed this woman's whole life, and you really feel that. And it's one of those where you don't feel it passing as you read it. It doesn't feel like a particularly long book, but you get to the end and you've gone on this whole adventure. I love books like that. Obviously, it's also I love pirates. I don't know if I've mentioned this ever before on the channel. I love pirates. I love Pirates by the Caribbean. As a kid, they were some of my favourite movies, and it's deeply instilled this love of pirates. And so if you love Pirates of the Caribbean, this, it's definitely got a vibe of that there. It's not fantasy, it is just historical fiction. But, the unruly... What is it? There's an island that's all unruly and piratey. The relationship's really nuanced. And here's another thing. I don't want to talk about this too much because it does happen quite a bit later in the book, but when we do get into that queerness and we get into relationships and romantic feelings, it's a complex and nuanced situation, and I really enjoyed it. But the author I could feel her hand. We would assume our main character would feel a certain way, and our main character, Mary, is constantly telling us, no, I did not feel that way. He said it so often. I was like, okay, I get it. But I also didn't really believe her. I was like, you can do better though. I don't know. Maybe it's because she was telling us so much that she didn't feel like that. I was like, but are you sure though? It's annoying because I really in the beginning for a while thought it might be a perfect book for me. I really thought I was just going to fall head over heels in love with it, and I did really enjoy it, and I definitely have a lot of love for it. But there's a couple of niggly little things like that are just getting under my skin. But I think I would leaning in between an 8.5 out of 10, maybe a 9 out of 10. I did listen to that one via audiobook as well, and it was narrated by Dakota Blue Richards, who did a really lovely job. I really loved her voice. And then we have Destroy the Day by Bridget Kammerer. I started reading this one before Saltblood. This is what made me want to read Saltblood, because there's kind of a little bit of pirates in this one too. It's so heavy, it's so big compared to the first two books in this trilogy. So this is the third and final book in the Destroy the Night trilogy by Bridget Kammerer. Bridget Kammerer also wrote the Cursebreakers trilogy, and in that one the last book is way smaller than the first two, so when it came and it was so big I was so surprised. I listened to this one via audiobook as well, and it's narrated by Lexi McDougall, Chase Brown and Christopher Ragland. So I really didn't love the first book in this trilogy. I'll link the videos where I talk about both the first book and the second book down below. Being that it's the third book in a trilogy, there's not a lot I can say. It's a YA fantasy trilogy, and it deals with like a pandemic-esque situation, and it's very much kind of about like politics in court. It's one of those, it's not actually got any magic. The only fantasy element of it is that it's like in a make-believe land, which was really interesting, because I don't know if I've ever actually read a fantasy like that that's just that it's a make-believe land, not that it's got like zero magic. I found the first one really slow because of like, it's all just politics, but I didn't care about the politics very much. It didn't feel very in-depth to me. And then I picked up the second one via audiobook, and I actually enjoyed it much more. It did very much have that filler book feeling in the second one. That one's the one where there's the most pirateness happening. It's more of like an adventure. This one I feel like has a nice blend of the two. We have the politics because we have an extra perspective in this one that we didn't have in the first. No, they were there in the second one, now that I think about it. But I loved all three of our perspectives in this one. I think I loved the boys the most. They were a lot of fun to spend time with. The newer perspective that comes in book 2 and it kind of really develops in this one, I think he might have been my favourite. I loved spending time with him. I loved the relationship that happened with him. But I actually had a lot of fun with this. I had like very little hopes after book 1. I was really tempting to ditch the trilogy, and now I'm actually glad that I read it. I did actually have a fun time. It was kind of slow for a final book. Like, it wasn't very actually. It took like, I remember thinking like, we've gotten to 200 pages and we've only just like gotten to here. Like, we've not actually established anything yet. But I didn't mind. I did have the same thing that happened with the last book in the Cursebreakers trilogy, where we had this big climactic moment and then it felt very underwhelming where it happened. And we had a couple of those in here as well, unfortunately. But I really liked the ending specifically. It left me feeling very happy and hopeful, and I don't know, I thought it was a really nice end. I thought it was a very apt end as well. And I didn't like the end for the Cursebreakers trilogy, so that was a nice difference. On the whole, I'd say it's a good, not great trilogy. I think I'd give it... It's hard to be like, but I had so much fun, but then at the same time, objectively, I know it's not the best. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Next up, we have the third and final non-fiction book that I read this month, and that was How to Fail. Everything I've Ever Learned from Things Going Wrong by Elizabeth Day. Elizabeth Day has a podcast called How to Fail, and this is kind of her surmising, I think, most of her learnings from the podcast, but then also her own experience. So it's broken down into different categories: how to fail at fitting in, how to fail at tests, how to fail at your 20s, and so on and so forth. And I really like that structure, the way that we really got to spend like an in-depth time with this topic, and it's quite a good array of topics. I think a good amount of these will apply to most people. I read Friendaholic by Elizabeth Day earlier this year and adored it. I think I learned some valuable things. As you can see, I did do tabbing, I did do underlining. Just didn't knock my socks off. Really interesting idea. I love the way she collates like anecdotes from her podcast, and if you listen to the audiobook, it's narrated by Elizabeth Day, and then she like literally just takes the sound clips from the podcast from like the guests saying whatever the quotes are. So I highly recommend the audiobook. I definitely feel like I learned some things. I definitely feel like I broadened my perspective on some things. I don't think it was as revolutionary. Like, I don't think I've learned tons, like, compared to some of the other non-fiction that I've been reading. Again, I'm glad to have read it. I just don't feel particularly strongly towards it. So I think I'd also give this one a 7 out of 10. But I am also aware of my problems with How to Fail are very subjective, more so than like I think there isn't anything necessarily done wrong about the book. And then we have the 6th and final book I finished in May. Now technically, did I finish it on June 1st? I think I technically did. But in my defense, I had just come home from a trip. I was exhausted. I had 1 chapter left. I'm counting it because it was that 1 chapter, dang it. I read the vast majority of this book in May. And that was Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. After Destroy the Day and all like the politics and the thatness of the fantasy world, I was really craving something similar, and so I had a feeling this one might scratch that itch, and it did. It really did. I ended up having so much fun with it. I was so unsure. Literally the only reason I even picked it up, the only reason I have it, is because of how stunning this Illumicrate edition is. The pages, I'm obsessed. It's so stinking gorgeous. Like, this colour palette is everything to me. Oh, and also, I've not even shown you. This is what it looks like naked. Look at it. Look at it. Ah, stunning. It says Tales of the Sorcerer Kings I'm not going to pronounce who that's by, but this is like a book within the book. So I cannot wait to get my hands on the Nets of Kumo Crate edition of the second book. But I was really apprehensive about this one. I hadn't read a Cassandra Clare book since City of Heavenly Fire. This is her first adult novel as well, which is also one of the reasons that made me want to pick it up, because it felt like a fresh start. I think it's because it's been so long since I read Shadowhunters, and I do distinctly remember it. Even though I loved a lot of those books, I always had a little bit of a problem with her writing, so like I just didn't get on with it very well. And like, it's a big chunky boy. It's the first of a series, and I didn't want to have to commit to a series that I only felt like half-heartedly towards, but I ended up really enjoying it. I have a lot of thoughts. I think the thing that needs to be said first and foremost is that while I was reading it, I was obsessed with it. I could not stop thinking about it. I went away to Hay Festival the weekend. Like, I started it one week, I went away for the weekend, and then I carried on the next week. And the whole time I was there, all I could think about was Swordcatcher. I couldn't bring it with me because it's like a tome, but it's all I could think about. And like during the day, I was so looking forward to like the evening when I could sit down and read more of Swordcatcher. One was raised to rule, one was trained to die. Welcome to the Chronicles of Castle. Like the blurs for this one is not great. We have two lead characters. One of them is Kel, and he is the Swordcatcher. So he is basically like a body double for the prince, so that when there's like certain political events and such where the prince needs to be in attendance but there's a risk of him being assassinated, our Swordcatcher will step in place so he can quite literally catch the sword, so the future king doesn't die. And so he's very loyal to the Prince Connor of Castlane. I pronounce it Castlane. I think it's actually Castellane, and it's a French word. It's a place in France, I believe. So if I say Castlane and I'm saying it wrong, just please ignore me. There's a very intense like court situation, like the way it works. There's different charters who run different trades, and they all kind of have these big meetings with the king. And then there's also like politics in the sense of like other countries, but we've dipped our toes in, but I don't feel too comfortable with that yet. I think in part I would like a map of the world, because we only have a map of Castellane. Ooh. But I foresee this something that's going to be expanded upon as the series develops. I think there's supposed to be at least a minimum of 5 books. I really hope so. And then our other perspective is Lynn, who's basically like a medic. She's a physician, but she's also an Ashgar, which is a community that's kind of been outlawed. They have to stick into their own little section of the city. Some countries have even like killed or like booted out all their Ashgar people. It's kind of a religious movement. There is magic in this land, but that once upon a time the Sundering happened, and the Sundering took away all the magic, and the Ashgar are the only ones that have these like little relics of magic left, and so that's why they're frowned upon, and they've got like their whole religion, and it's stemmed into the backstory of this whole Sundering and the way magic used to be. But generally women don't become physicians, so she's kind of looked down upon, and we're following them as like weird things start to occur in Castlane. Felt very much like there was 2 sections to this book, and I really liked that, because we have Cal, we have all of the political stuff, we have like the countries, we have like what's gonna happen with our prince, and then we have Lynn, and we have like the magical, like what, like magic is no longer here, can we get it back, will it come back someday, all of that stuff. And they feel separate right now, but I can only imagine they'll eventually converge. It's got so much promise. There's a lot of like prophecies and promises and like debts and schemes afoot. So much so that I found it kind of overwhelming. There are a lot of like main mysteries, and then within those main mysteries are these like little seedling baby mysteries, and I found like I was so scared of like forgetting some of the smaller nuances amongst it all. I actually had to sit down and write a list of the things that like I really was concerned about and that I wanted to be figured out in the next book. Most of them I feel like actually ended up being related to one another. I did definitely feel overwhelmed sometimes. I mean, it's because we don't delve into any of them in any great depth, because they just kind of keep piling on. They keep piling on. How related they are to each other or not is like not made abundantly clear, because our characters don't really know what the hell's going on. And like while the world and the politics are really interesting, I definitely feel like I have a better grasp on the magical side of it, because we have in between each chapter we have like these little intersections of like magical history books that basically just go over the history of like what happened, how the Sundering worked, and how the Ashgar came to be. I feel much more confident in like that backstory, and like everything with Lynn therefore just was a little bit easier to follow. Like how it's just mysteries within mysteries, like these political schemes. But it's also because he was spinning so many plates, it sometimes felt like some plates were kind of left on the wayside for a bit, because he's not got time, he's got priorities, he's got a prince to protect. I really liked these characters I'm definitely attached to them, but I don't feel like I'm invested to them quite yet. I do think there was that writing thing again where there was like a gap between me and them sometimes, and because we're only reading from two perspectives, I saw someone in a review say she would like more perspectives, and I definitely agree. I would love to get in Prince Connor's head. I think it's so clever the way we're not in his head, because the way that adds like a layer of mystery to him. It's just, I want to know what's going on there. I really like Connor. He's one of my like probably favourite characters. They're all very interesting though, and I can see myself coming more invested in them over time, so I'm not too worried about that. They all have a lot of fun personalities. They do all feel nuanced, and like they have multiple kind of allegiances and things happening with them. There's quite a lot of side characters, and I think like I knew this from like Cassandra Clare's older books. Like she does characters well, like they have a lot of fun to them. Their dialogue is always really great, and like side characters are always like really fleshed out and interesting. But there's a group of them that I would get confuzzled with, and I don't know why. Connor's friends, I would struggle to remember like who's who, like who I like and trust and who I don't. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I didn't spend enough time with them. I don't know if I just wasn't paying enough attention. I don't know. I'm sure in the next book when we like are reminded who's who, maybe it will be better for me. But yeah, it's a great ensemble book, and I'm very much looking forward to reuniting with our characters. We have a really interesting bunch going on here. And another thing with the characters, it wasn't obvious who was gonna get with who, like romantically in the beginning. It's a very slow burn, so that's not to say that like anything's set in stone. In fact, I think it'd be really interesting if we deviated from what Cassie's like very clearly setting up and like explore some other options. I made an assumption of who it would be, I think just based on like track record and stuff, and I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised. Coming back to it being a slow burn though, definitely more questions are asked than answered. Very little actually is like established. It's more just like opening up lots of boxes. So it did kind of almost get to a point at the 3/4 mark where I got a little bit frustrated, because it's like it feels like some of these mysteries we could start pulling together. Like it feels like some of them are more obviously linked than our lead characters are realizing. Mostly it's Cal, to be honest. But then the end was so exciting. It was such a great end. I don't know if I forgive it. I kind of think I forgive it. I did read a couple like bad reviews being like nothing happened, like a frolic through friction. Ashley said like you could literally read the synopsis and take away just as much, and I can see why, because not a lot happens, but I enjoyed myself so much. I don't know how much I care. I do wish we'd had like a couple more like some things were resolved, because literally it's just like asking questions without any answers, more or less. It does feel very layered and nuanced. There's a lot of stuff working in the background. There's a lot of mysteries and just things happening behind the scenes that we know will become important. I'm hoping that a lot of them are interlinked and it's not as like overwhelming as I'm thinking it is. My last, I suppose, point would be about the writing itself. It was ever so slightly overwritten. Did have a slightly younger feeling to it. I don't know what it is. Something about the characters felt a little bit juvenile, and I don't know what it is. Like, it is technically adult. There is like there wasn't very much swearing though, to be honest. There's a couple times people curse. They mention sex, but you never actually see any sex. I watched in an interview that Cassie said like the only difference for her was that the characters were like older and they were dealing with adult issues versus young adult issues. I don't know. I did get on with the writing. Like, I didn't have any problems with it. I like read it very easily and consistently. It was very pretty at times though. I did like the feeling it had to it. I just knew that I was so addicted and obsessed with it. I do feel like it was a really slow start. I don't think it was the strongest first book, but I had so much fun. It's so hard to like think about anything other than that. Very, very, very much looking forward to the second book in this series. I think it comes out like May next year. I cannot wait. Really hoping that it's just one of those cases where they get stronger as we go, because we learn more and we feel more sure-footed in the world with this political landscape. But again, I think a world map would really help me. What would I give it? I'm gonna say an 8.5 out of 10. It feels like I feel too obsessed about it for it to be an 8. But I don't think it's a 9. I don't think it's strong enough to be a 9. I'm gonna say 8.5 for now. And those were the 6 books I read in May. I feel like Saltblood and Swordcatcher and Destroy the Day really took my time with them. I really was invested and just like fully immersed myself in those stories. Yeah, that's all I have for this video. I would love to hear what you read in May. What was your favourite book you read in May? If you've read any of these and you have any opinions, please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!